Alrighty, so round 8. At this point, we are on 2.5 out of 7. So yeah, really not a great score, -2. But there's 2 more games to play, and I definitely thought they would both be pretty tough and interesting. And I'm still motivated to show some good chess and get some good experience. So here I'm playing against Raja Panjwani. I think originally he's from Canada. And a really strong player. Actually, I believe he already has his GM norms, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe he has like 2 norms or something. So very, very strong player. Although this is actually the first time that I think we've played over the board. Maybe we played online or something. I'm not really sure. Anyway, he goes for the Fianchetto King's Indian, which was not a huge surprise. I think he's played this one a couple times before. And I end up going for this line. I've been playing this one for a couple of years now with knight c6 and e5. To me, it feels like this is what gives black the most King's Indian-esque type of positions against the Fianchetto variation, which has this reputation for kind of like shutting down black's counterplay, and so this is the only line I've really found so far where I feel like black gets kind of nice attacking chances on the king side. So white goes d5. D takes e5 is also a very serious option here, but d5, big main line, and now knight b8. So often the knight goes to e7, of course, in the King's Indian. The point of playing knight b8 here is that I want to redeploy the knight to a6, and then eventually this knight can stand extremely well on c5, or even in some cases actually jump into b4, depending on what white does. So he goes e4, a5, and now plays a pretty rare move, rook e1. And I don't think I had ever seen this move before this game. At least I couldn't recall. And generally what white does in this structure is they actually use the e1 square for the knight, and they maneuver the knight to d3, and then this knight tries to help white push c5, and white kind of plays on the queen side. Okay, typical play is like knight a6, knight d3, knight d7, and then black tries to put this knight on c5, plays for f5 as well. This knight often will then recapture, and it's a King's Indian. It's a fun position to play. But here white goes rook e1. And it's a really interesting idea because basically he's using the rook to defend the e-pawn. Like I'm going to go knight a6, knight c5, and the e-pawn is defended. And then white just wants to play for like the typical queenside expansion with a3, rook b1, b4. And I don't think I reacted to this one perfectly. I think what I did is pretty much okay, but definitely probably my play can be improved in this stage. So knight a6, b3, knight c5, rook to b1. And white is just planning a very slow a3, b4 push. I played bishop d7, h3, and I should note actually white was playing this very, very quickly, and it's not too surprising because this is a line I've played before, so of course he would be expecting it. And yeah, clearly he had this really well prepared. So now at this point I played knight e8. I'm not sure if this is the right move here. I think maybe b6 is a little bit better. And then the idea is like, okay, let's say white plays something like a3, black can play, for example, h5, maybe h6 is also a move. But the point is if white is going b4, then the reaction would be to take and play knight a4. Basically trading off this knight on c3. White can't really move it away to any good square. If knight b5, then importantly there's takes and knight c3, winning the exchange. So let's say white goes like queen c2, for example, and then black takes, and for instance knight h7 followed by f5. I think black's position is very, very acceptable. Black can also consider playing like on the queen side, like rook a4, queen a8. Because in this position with the bishop on g2, white's king is safer, but white has less support on the queen side because the bishop is kind of missing from this diagonal. So it's actually not always the case that white just wins the battle on the queen side, and black can actually kind of fight back on this side of the board as well. So I feel like that probably would have been better, but okay, I played knight e8, bishop e3, b6. Now white plays a3. And this already felt like a critical moment for me, because I essentially have two choices. I can either play a4, like I played in the game, with the idea to go b4, knight b3, or I can play f5. So in f5, I wasn't sure what I'm doing after takes b4. And yeah, the engine kind of confirms here. Actually, it shows a nice idea for white. If I was to take and play knight a4 again, here white can play this move knight to e2. And my knight on a4 is actually kind of stranded, like not really doing much. And white is going to play like queen to c2, maybe maneuver this knight as well. But it's actually, black's pawns are not so great here. Like, it's really hard for me to achieve f4, especially with the knight on e2. And then white can go after the pawn like with knight h4, can play for f4. And then if I ever push e4, then the knight can use this d4 square. So I think white is doing quite well here. During the game, I really just wasn't sure at all about this position. And I decide to push a4 and plant my knight on b3, which is kind of a thematic idea. Now knight to d2. And white just immediately trades this knight off, which I think makes sense, and then eventually is hoping to push for c5. So knight takes d2. I also considered knight d4 here, but I think this one would end up quite badly after takes knight b5. I really tried to make it work, because I mean white does give up the dark squared bishop here, but the problem I felt was not so much that the d pawn is going to be like lost eventually, but more just that I didn't really see how I'm going to create any kind of real counterplay. And if I play f5, for example, then let's say white plays takes and knight e4, and eventually I just felt like my light squares are going to be very, very weak. So like knight d4 is coming, queen d2, knight g5, knight e6. This knight could also come to e6 or c6. So the more I looked at it, the more I felt like my position is strategically quite risky. So I end up going knight takes d2, queen takes, f5, and now threatening to push f4, which is pretty annoying for white. So for example, if c5, f4, white can't take twice, because then the piece would be hanging. Probably take this one, and then rook takes f4. And if white goes bishop d4, then f3. Probably pretty annoying. And okay, I'm suddenly getting some real attacking chances on the king's side here after like queen h4 and stuff. So instead, white takes on f5, which I think is very thematic, pushes f4, and now I push e4. And yeah, to be honest, I still don't really understand the structure. It's just a very, very tough one. And it's actually kind of funny, because I had I helped with this match, this training match that David played on this channel against our friend Lafong Hua. And they asked me to pick, 3 middle game positions that are closely related for them to play out. And I chose 3 structures that look like this, exactly this like f4, e4 structure, where white gets this blockade, and it's kind of double-edged, with the added wrinkle that in every position I think black had given up the bishop for the knight on c3, and then it was just kind of strategically a very imbalanced position. And even after like observing that match, I still don't feel like I understand these positions that well. But I wasn't too unhappy here, because I did feel like it's a very, very playable position. And although I'm like down on the clock at this point, like something like 40 minutes, at least I know what my plan is. I want to bring my knight back to f6. I want to put my queen on g6. I want to throw an h5, shift the king over to the h file, put a rook on g8, maybe put 2 rooks on the g file, kind of target this one, and basically just try to keep white from pushing g4, and also just trying to put a little bit of pressure on the king side. I definitely think white is better in this position, but it's really not so easy to play. So he ends up going bishop d4 right away. Actually, the Stockfish really dislikes this move, although I thought it was very natural to try and trade the dark squared bishops. But the Engine actually doesn't think white should trade these bishops and thinks black is totally fine after taking in this plan of rook f6 and bringing the rook to g6, which, yeah, granted, I didn't really consider during the game, but yeah, now looking at it, it makes a lot of sense. And then black can even follow up like knight g7, knight h5, and then targeting this g-pawn in the long run. So that apparently was fine for black, although I kind of felt like I didn't want to trade the bishops here, and I ended up playing knight f6. So instead, there's a question if it was possible to play g4. Well, this one's very risky because black takes this one and then threatening to take on h3, and the king side opens up, and black's king still has kind of more cover here, and yeah, it could be really, really dangerous for white. So it is something that white is playing for in the position, but generally white likes to build up first, like let's say king h2, putting the bishop on e2, putting both rooks on the g file, maybe even like bringing the bishop over around to c2, and then after a million preparatory moves, then one day breaking with g4, and then that could be really, really strong. And yeah, I think the engine suggests something like bishop f1 here, just like a very slow plan, and it gives white an advantage, but it's one of those positions that it's really, I mean, you still have to, I think, play extremely well as white to actually convert it. Anyway, so bishop d4, knight f6, king h2. We both start making our improving moves here. Bishop f1, queen g6, queen e3. Here I played h5, bishop e2, king h7, and rook to g1. I put the rook on g8. And yeah, I wasn't really sure what white is going to do here. I thought maybe he's going to, again, play for g4 at some point, but it's really hard to do in this position because, of course, all my pieces are just kind of like overprotecting against g4. And so, yeah, as soon as white plays g4, I mean, both kings kind of open up. But then he really surprised me. He ends up playing h4, which I kind of understood because in all these positions, all these lines, I do have ideas of playing queen h6 or bishop h6 and one day targeting white with my own h4 pawn break. And this one can be annoying, especially if white is not kind of equipped to defend on the dark squares. I mean, I thought it was a little bit premature because I'm not really threatening h4 here, but I can understand why he would want to kind of stop this one forever and then look to like build up on the queen side and push c5. So I think he stronger was to just push c5 here without this. But the key idea that white has to see is that after black takes twice on c5, white needs to not recapture here with the bishop, which allows black to just kind of fight for the queen side with rook to b8. And this is something where it's like, this is what makes these positions so tricky, is because it's like, it's not always great for white to open the queen side because white's king is kind of like loose and possibly exposed on the second rank. So, and black has this protected pass pawn on e4. So it's not really in white's best interest to just let the position get completely out of control because one day like things can open up and there can be real problems in white's position. However, if instead of taking on c5, white plays bishop e5, then white can definitely count on some advantage here, it seems, because the idea is to either grab this pawn on c7, which is a pretty important pawn to take, also taking the b8 square and allowing white to push d6, and also opening up the way for white's queen to maybe get into the action with queen takes c5. So this move, I mean, I really wasn't thinking about during the game, and I'm not sure about my opponent's thoughts on this c5 push. But yeah, I can tell you I did not have this one in my mind, but it is kind of a nice motif just to like not recapture the pawn right away, but allow white to actually target the queen side in, let's say, more effective manner. So anyways, white ends up going h4, and now I would say the situation really changes because it's like I'm actually just playing. Now I'm just playing against like this g3 weakness and the possibility of some kind of knight to g4. So I start to kind of reroute everything. And my plan is actually to bring my bishop to e7 so that I can always maybe look for sacrifices against h4, and then to just kind of triple up my heavy pieces on the g file, just to put as much pressure as possible. But of course you need to lead with the rooks here, because it's hard to lead with the queen, but when you lead with the rook, sometimes that allows for like more sacrificial ideas. So rook b d1. Now I played king h6, just to actually defend the h5 pawn, because I want to play bishop f8 here, but then I was a little bit just unsure about what's going on if white takes on f6 and snags this pawn, because I mean, I felt like black should have like normal compensation with the nice dark squared bishop, and of course it's very, very hard for white to ever use their extra pawn, at least in the middle game. But yeah, I wasn't really sure if I can get away with taking this pawn, and I didn't see the need. So king h6 first, rook d2, bishop f8, knight d1. So now white starts his maneuver knight d1, knight f2, knight h3, knight to g5. And I definitely did not want to allow white to do this for free. So I played b5. And I think I played it pretty quickly too. And I think my opponent was expecting this move, because if I remember correctly, I feel like he spent a lot of time on knight d1, then I played b5, and he played knight f2, I think reasonably quickly here. So it's kind of a funny thing where it's like I wanted to play b5, and he definitely was expecting it. But b5 is not a great move, because it actually helps white open the queen side, which is not what I want to do. And I think instead of knight f2, for example, white could play like queen c3, which would have been a stronger move. Let's say hitting this one, bishop e7, and then bringing the knight to e3, for example. And here I think I would be in serious trouble, because now I think white is just getting like an ideal setup. This knight on e3 is just the perfect blockader, it covers any kind of g4 tricks, and then white can one day just build up on the c file, and yeah, I'm going to have serious problems here. Instead of b5 with knight g4 have been good. You know, I just wanted to wait on knight g4, basically because I felt like I could play it at any moment. And yeah, the other thing is, like, I definitely wanted to take back with, let's say, a piece here. But really, I just didn't want to commit to this one right away if I didn't have to. Here I would think white gets like knight f2, knight h3, and knight g5, which would be very, very annoying. So at the very minimum, I think I was just going to wait for knight f2 and then possibly play it then. But yeah, I really actually just wanted to wait on it mostly. So b5, yeah, not good, but okay, I kind of wanted to open the queen side as well. Knight f2 is played, takes, bishop e7. And so here I'm basically just in no rush to play knight g4, because white's not threatening to go knight h3 with the king on h2, queen on e3. So just bishop e7, bishop b2, rook g6, king h1. And now I think white was ready to go knight h3, knight g5, so now I really just can't put it off any longer. And so knight g4. So takes, rook takes, bishop e2, rook g6. And at this point, honestly, I felt like my position is fine, and if anything, it's just like I kind of like my chances, because I can just build up. I can look for sacrifices against h4. I can try to like bring my queen to d8, for example. And, you know, maybe somewhere I can start poking around on the queen side as well. Whereas I didn't see exactly how white can really do a whole lot without having to, again, defend against all the sacrifices. So here he goes, bishop d1. I think this is a mistake because it allows me to actually activate my own bishop with bishop b5, which I could have done right away, but I decided to do this one first because this threatens bishop takes h4, just to see how white defends against this threat. He played rook g2. Now I play this one. White goes king g1 to cover bishop f1. And here I played bishop f6. I think David didn't really like this move. He wanted me to keep this bishop just kind of to annoy white, but I honestly at this point just didn't see how else to improve my position. I didn't really see the point of going like queen e8, queen d8. anymore, and with bishop f6, my point was just to try to trade off the dark square bishop, so that maybe I can somehow try to infiltrate with the queen. And at this point, I'm just kind of, just trying to like poke from all directions. I didn't really think I'm like better necessarily. I just thought maybe my position's not, at least not more difficult to play than white's. So takes, bishop e2. I was kind of hoping for king h2 here, because then bishop f1 would actually win the game. But I think this was okay, a little bit hopeful. But the point is, after rook g1, I have rook takes g3, and if rook takes g3, there's queen takes h4, and black is winning in this line. Or if white takes with the queen on g3, then rook takes, and everything is kind of hanging in white's position, because there's no rook h3, and if king takes, there's queen c3. So okay, but no, that didn't happen. Bishop e2, which I think is the best move, trading off this bishop. Otherwise, I might plant my bishop on d3 and then go after the d5 pawn, or come in with the queen, and it could be really, really bad for white. So bishop e2, takes, queen g7. Actually, the engine pointed out an idea I didn't consider at all, but it was c6 here, or even c5. And the point being to follow up with d5, threatening both d4 and then to just kind of win back the pawn. I think white has nothing better than like rook d2 and then queen c6, and I'm not sure if black is seriously better here, but okay, white has a lot of things that they have to now defend against, because we have pressure here, and of course the queen is still trying to come in. But objectively, white should be okay anyway. Instead, we kind of maneuvered around a little bit. I played queen g7, king h2, rook to g4, just to force white to think about possible rook takes h4 sacks at some point. And these do become relevant later on. White goes rook c2, queen g6. Okay, now of course white cannot take here, because then I do take on h4, and after king g1, let's say rook g4 back, and then h4, and white's king side starts to fall apart. So yeah, instead white just pushes b5, and I just go rook to g7. I'm not really playing for a win at this point. I just am kind of shuffling back and forth and just trying to keep the pressure, because I just didn't really see actually how I can break through in this position. Like, white is perfectly solid enough. But well, okay, queen f2 is played. I just keep the game going. Queen f7, and now white plays b6. And okay, I mean, I was kind of expecting this one. As soon as white plays b5, you feel like that's probably their idea. But I wasn't unhappy to allow this, because I also felt like it's possibly opening up the position, maybe not to white's favor. So takes. If I take on d5, then I have to deal with rook to d2, and rook takes d6 with check, and so that looked very, very unpleasant. So I didn't want to do this one. Instead, I just go queen f6, and here I'm possibly already threatening to take, and then I have at least perpetual. So if white makes some move, let's say, I don't know, rook c6, for example, then I can take on h4. I think queen takes h4 might also be possible. Not really sure. But this one I would be worried about king g1 and then rook takes d6 coming next. So who knows what's happening here. But on rook takes h4, this one is a lot simpler, because if king g1, then the queen can come in this way, and I have a bunch of checks. And then, of course, after gh4, queen takes h4, I have a perpetual. And yeah, probably not more than that. But okay, at this point, I'm still very much happy with the draw. I feel like I've been defending, all game. I was worse at the opening, so draw definitely very decent result at this point. But here, white goes back queen e3. So he's still pushing for the win, and he kind of stops the sacrifice, because now I don't have the perpetual, but allowing black to play rook to b7. And yeah, I play this move, I mean, reasonably quickly. Because now, I mean, I have this like b3 invasion square, and all of a sudden it's actually very, very unpleasant for white. Because rook b3 is coming, a3 pawn is hanging. Of course, there's tactics against the g3 pawn. For example, rook b3, and then this rook takes g3, follow my queen h4 check, and then winning back the rook. And all of a sudden, it's actually very difficult for white. He's forced to go queen to c3 to try and escape into the endgame. But I thought for a little bit here, I was thinking about like maybe playing king g6 or rook g6, like trying to trade queens on my own terms. Eventually, I realized none of this stuff is really, really working, and I always have to be worried about white's queen infiltrating. So I decided let's go into the endgame while we still can. And just rook g7, just trying to bring this rook actually back into the game, because now the rook is completely useless on g4. And yeah, here I actually felt like I was better because, I mean, we both have a lot of weaknesses. You know, like the d pawns and a pawns are both weak, and both kingside pawns are weak. Like if my king is not around, these h and f pawns could be huge weaknesses one day. But I felt like with this protected passer, my chances just have to be better here, because white's king is not yet in the game. If white's king was on e3, maybe it would be a little bit different story, but then the g3 pawn would also be a target. So with this e pawn, it actually makes it hard. Like it means that white's rooks can't just activate themselves all freely, because the e pawn might just run and skate through. And that ends up, I think, being a relevant factor. So rook c6, rook d7, just defending this one. Rook a6. If white brings the second rook in, then I think my plan was to just go rook b5 and start putting pressure on this one. Especially, I would really love to win the d5 pawn. So rook a6, rook a7. I definitely don't mind the rook trade, because I felt like I'm going to be better here after I play rook a5, which would kind of freeze white's rook, right? He can go rook c2, but rook a5, and I'm kind of attacking his pawn first. So either way, he's forced to go passive with rook to d2. But yeah, I felt like something like this, I should be better. I have this idea to go rook c5, rook c3. Of course, I can try to bring my king around as well. And yeah, I feel like if I can force white to be passive, even if he goes rook d4 here, I'm always happy to have white take on a4, right? Because I win this one, and then I get two connected pass pawns in the center. So I was definitely liking my chances here. White goes rook b6, rook a5, rook d2, and now just king g6. Just I'm starting to bring my king in. Here white goes rook to d4, and I think at this point, yeah, the situation starts to get really, really bad for white, because I just play rook c5. Once again, I'm very happy if white takes on a4, because I'll take this one. But otherwise, I'm getting ready to infiltrate. Rook c3, rook c2 check, and then rook c3, and it's very, very difficult for white here. So he tried rook c6. Of course, if I take this one, then that would not be good. Then white starts to get a bunch of counterplay. So rook b5, and now he can't really stop me from coming in. If rook b4, then we can, of course, take this one. Maybe we can even take and put the rook behind the pawn, and even something like this. I mean, I don't know, rook takes d6, it might get a little messy, but I would actually think black's chances here are probably pretty good. But okay, simpler is just rook takes d5, and black is doing well. So rook cc4, I analyzed this one a bit, and it's a really tough endgame for white, because basically I think he just needs to keep his rook passive, but defending the second rank. I think something like, let's say king g2 first, king f6, rook b8 was better. Just to, let's say, keep this rook defending the king, and then keeping this rook always threatening to go to h8 and go after the h5 pawn. And then this would kind of make it hard for black, because I can't really activate my own king. And if I try to get my rook out, then of course I have to deal with like rook d8, rook h8, rook g8, and so on. So I think white is probably holding here, but okay, it would still be pretty sharp. Rook d4 is very understandable, just to try to activate the rook, but now, yeah, it's actually just black that is getting in. So rook c4, I gave a check, king g1, and I played rook b7. At this point, actually, we're both pretty low on time. As you can imagine, this is like move 60, so we're probably close to under 5 minutes here. I could have played this move as well, which I evaluated as winning just with a very simple double attack. But I thought, okay, maybe white can go king to g2 here, and then if I take on a4. Wasn't exactly sure what's going on here. Ultimately, I just felt like this move is a lot stronger because it's actually a mate threat. If white takes on a4, we have check, and the second rook comes in, and then we have a very nice rook e1 mate at the end. Or if the king goes to the h-file, then there's going to be rook h1. So to me, this move looked absolutely crushing, and white is forced to play rook to d1 to defend the back rank, which definitely a good sign. And now rook b3. Second rook comes in. I really thought it was actually just completely over here. Maybe it was even stronger just to dominate the second rank with rook e2, followed by rook to b2. But I just felt like, okay, the rook can get to the second rank while also taking the g-pawn. So why not go this way? So rook c6 takes king h1. And yeah, here I was pretty unhappy with my technique overall because I felt like this shouldn't have been that hard. The problem for me was that I don't have any immediate win. I just have to take all the pawns and survive white's counterplay because white is still ready, about to take the d6 pawn, and then wants to activate the rook with like rook c1, rook c7. And then my own king, I felt, could get in trouble because I don't really have a way to escape given the structure. If I could take all these pawns and then escape like king f6, king e5, that would be awesome, but I'm just not in time. So I repeat a couple times to gain time. And repeat again, king to g1. And then I go rook takes h4. I think the simplest would have been to take the a pawn. And the point is that I always have a mate threat at the end here. So white can take on d6, and he can even play rook to c1. But the problem is he can't really get the second rook in without allowing rook a1 mate. And in the meantime, I'm going to go rook a2, a3, e3. I just have too much play in the position. Of course, I can always give checks along the second rank and force a rook trade and win with the a pawn. I think this would have been the cleanest win. I really couldn't find a way for white to make it too messy. Of course, it's always easier after the game when you have the engine. You don't have the pressure of the clock. During the game, this looked super messy. I thought like rook c6, and there's going to be some perpetual. But the reality is that there really isn't enough for white, and yeah, black should be just winning here. The king just escapes. So yeah, I think that was the easiest. I take here, rook takes d6, rook d7, king f6, rook d6, king e7, and now rook h6. I go rook g4 check. I repeat again. And now I bring the second rook to h2. And here I basically had a sense of how the game was going to proceed. White pushes d6. He doesn't really have another way to do anything. I'm ready to just start running e3 and so on. So d6, king f7, d7. The pawn, of course, looks very scary, but I am in time with rook g2 and rook h1 here. And actually calculated this line already. And my plan was to play this rook endgame, where white cannot hold on to the d-pawn. If check, then just king e6. And importantly, if rook takes h5, I don't take this one right away, because then white takes here. I have king g6 tempo. Again, white can't hold on to the d-pawn. He can go rook g5 check, king f6, but white is losing this one, and then losing the resulting endgame, because I'm just going to play rook d3, rook f3, and take the f4 pawn. So it's only one pawn up at the end, but it's pretty clearly winning for black just because the f5, e4 pawns are very strong, and I have this idea to just take and create two connected passers. But okay, so going back to this position, I had some time here, and I decided to play rook to d2. Because I felt like this was actually a cleaner way. Because compared to this line, where the king ends up on g2, I wanted to play rook d2 so that in the same position after takes, rook h5, king g6, in this exact same endgame, white's king is on f1 instead of g2, which I thought is just better because now I get rook d3, rook f3 with check. So I'm like a tempo up, and I'm going to win the pawn even faster and should be a winning endgame. So that was kind of my idea. I mean, it's kind of clever because rook h1 is just a lot more immediate. And I also noted that if white promotes here, then I have rook h1, which is a nice checkmate and pretty important resource. I also saw that white could promote to a knight with check. And in my, I guess, calculation, I didn't think this was a big deal because I'm going king to g7. And somehow I just miscalculated things where I actually thought I'm just like winning here. But it's actually not so simple. Rook takes, rook takes, rook takes h5. And then if I don't take this knight right now, the knight is going to escape. And if I play king g6, then there's rook h8. And so I'm forced to take the knight, but then white takes the f5 pawn and is drawing. So actually he had a chance to save the game like this. I'm not sure if he noticed this one or not. I mean, again, we were both in pretty heavy time trouble. He might have also thought that it wasn't working. Because I think I saw like this one, rook takes h5, and then black has rook takes d1 mate. So I was like, okay, that's good. Like, yeah, somehow I just didn't count the tempos here with rook takes d2, and then rook takes h5. So that was definitely lucky. And okay, for this reason, rook h1 would have been just a lot smoother. As it turns out, after rook d2, white ends up just taking anyway, takes on h5, and we end up getting this endgame. And yeah, fortunately, this ends up winning for black. So rook a8, I started with king to g6 here. My idea was actually to try and bring the king in to take the pawn, which I thought would be even stronger. So if rook takes a4, then I would play here, and then there's no stopping king g4, king takes f4, and then black wins in a very straightforward way. But white started defending, very persistently here, rook g8 check. And then I actually didn't want to play king h5 here because then I thought, my king is kind of cut off, king f2. Like what? I actually I started to get very unsure here if I'm actually winning this one. Oh, also wait, there's also rook g5 that I would. So like yeah, king h6, and then yeah, I wasn't really sure. So I go rook g7, rook c7. I decide to go back this way, rook a8, and I decide just to revert to the previous plan with rook c3, rook f3. And just picking up the f-pawn. And then this one is good enough for black. With the two connected passers, generally, these are often just winning, especially if the rook can get behind the opponent's pass pawn. I mean, I'm talking about cases that are like 2 versus 1. This is almost always winning as long as, the pawns are easily defended. So rook a8, rook h4, there really wasn't too much drama anymore in the game. I'm just starting to bring in my king, and after something like a5, king f4, a6, I can kind of show an illustration of the issue. White can get the pawn all the way to a7, but as long as black's king is out in front of the pawns, white is never really able to do anything. And of course, there's always going to be back rank issues, and so white's rook ends up just being stuck. Whereas if you flip the position of the rooks, that would actually be very, very unclear. And I would think white is holding that one if you put white's rook in front of the pawn and black's rook behind, because then black's rook would be very passive. But okay, here we're able to get the rook behind the pawn, so things are pretty simple. White tried king d2 just to kind of get out of the way, but black is really just much, much stronger here with the 2 pawns. Rook b8, rook h2 check, king c3. I pushed e3. Now if a6, just rook a2, and then there's no stopping e2, king f2, and so on. So king b3, but e2, rook e8, rook h1, and here white resigned because after a6, we're just promoting, and we're just in time to stop the pawn. So this is a pretty simple calculation. And yeah, so after rook h1, this was resigned, 94 moves. Pretty long game. I was pretty happy about this one. There was a question in the chat if I felt an improvement in endgames due to the endgame sensei training. I mean, definitely, yeah. I mean, I think in general that's been really, really good training, especially when it comes to just playing out endgames on like the 30-second increment and not really panicking too much. I would say the Endgame Sensei stuff really helps in that regard. But yeah, it's also just given me a lot of awesome practice in playing like very typical practical endgames. And yeah, sometimes I even get positions that are kind of similar to like endgames we've played before, and so at least I have some intuition already about, you know, how to handle them.